All right. Hello, hello. We are live. I am Brittany Murray, and I am the host of the Necessity of Trauma Recovery Facilities. Tonight, I do have my special guest. We are talking about childhood trauma into adulthood, part two. Tonight, we do have Dr. Tara Henderson and Apostle Paula Cole as my guests. I'm so excited to have them, and I'm so grateful that they accepted to collaborate tonight. So, what I will do is I will have them just give a quick overview of who they are, and then we will jump into the discussion. So, Dr. Tara can go first.
Mhm. Hey everyone, so like Brittany said, I'm Dr. Tia Henderson, and I am actually an international student turned international educator. I've been a mental health professor for about 7 or 8 years, and what I do is I really teach and train mental health practitioners, anything from psychopathology, crisis and trauma, counseling skills, that kind of stuff. And I'm also a new author of The Couch Where Life Happens, which is really to help women get unstuck as it relates to their emotional development. It can be anywhere from friends and family, relationships, just getting unstuck in that type of way. So, yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
Thank you. Awesome. Apostle Paula Cole.
Hello, everybody. I am Apostle Paula Cole of Aruka Ministries. I'm the CEO and founder. I have taken over 20 years of working in the mental health field, along with those that have dual diagnosis of developmental disorders and mental health issues. But I primarily now work with individuals in the church population, helping them to deal with their past trauma, identifying triggers. My goal is to help them bring total healing and restoration to the whole man, so that the body is no longer broken, but we're healed and we're able to move forward.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'm so excited about this conversation because trauma is kind of my focus and what I do enjoy talking about. And so we are going to be able to provide to you all what childhood trauma into adulthood looks like, and bring different perspectives to the table. So the question is, what is trauma, to kind of lay the foundation? What is trauma? What does it look like? You are more than welcome to give examples of what trauma is, and then we can kind of go from there. And so either one of you can go. I can name whoever, but
Dr. Tara, you could go ahead with that.
Sure. Okay, so what a great way to start this convo off. Trauma, as many might know it, have been like a buzzword for the past few years. I would even say for the past few decades, especially now as it relates to us being within a space of multiple crises at the moment. But what I'd like to say is let's go the clinical route, and then we can kind of get a little bit more, into that nitty gritty. So according to the DSM-5, which is the Bible for us mental health practitioners, it serves in that type of capacity. It really says or identifies trauma as any exposure to actual or threatened death, anything from serious injury, sexual violence, in one or more ways. But the criticism that has happened over the years as it relates to that definition is that many events that are traumatic in nature, they don't necessarily have to be fully life-threatening or injurious, but they are considered an issue. So what I'm talking about really is, if you take into consideration emotional abuse, that might not show itself as an actual threat to death or serious injury at times. I'm also talking about like childhood emotional neglect. So that's a source of trauma. Then you have the layer of vicarious trauma, which is now considered real trauma. So when we talk about trauma, it's good that we actually move from that buzzword to really identify what does it look like, what has it been called or defined as over these past few years. And I'd also like to just quote Judith Herman. She's actually the author of Trauma and Recovery. So she talks a lot about the aftermath of violence and domestic abuse and even political terror, that kind of stuff. And she kind of brings it in by saying an event is traumatic if it's first extremely upsetting, So that's something to take into consideration. If it temporarily overwhelms the individual's internal resources, and the key here that I like to point out is if it produces lasting psychological symptoms. So those are some just qualifiers when we talk about trauma, identifying it, and yeah, fine tune it as best as possible.
Awesome. Apostle, did you want to add a little to that, or?
No, I think it was. I think it was a phenomenal definition, and I really like the fact of explaining how sometimes in this field words get picked up on, and when everybody starts picking up on these words, everybody does not have the same definition, and so then it starts to lead to huge amounts of confusion as to what is and what isn't. So I know for myself, I usually have to break it down in the sense of explaining it to individuals like, it can be a series of negative events that basically surpasses your ability to cope. So if you don't have good coping skills, if you're not able to really cope with it, then it becomes trauma, because sometimes what we do is we invalidate other people's negative events and their traumatic response to it because, oh, well, I went through the same thing and I came out fine. Well, you may have had a better support system. You may have had better coping skills. You may have grew up in a different environment. And just because you went through the same things, and it could be down to the most minute detail, but that does not mean that the people who go through the same thing will come out unscathed, or they will come out exactly the same. And I think that's one thing that we kind of forget about trauma, is that we kind of sometimes we just go, oh, you just need to get over that. And it's like, no, just because you got over in 6 months means it may take me 6 years if I don't get the proper help. So that's about the only thing that I would add to that, is don't negate someone's trauma because it doesn't match your experience.
Right. Yeah, not invalidating their lived experience just because it doesn't look the same as yours. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, you both made really great points. I mean, kind of segued into what that trauma may look like in the lives of others individually, whether it's in their homes or whether, like you stated, politically. Even I believe previously, Apostle Paulo Cole had also stated about how poverty is a form of trauma as well, in addition to what Dr. Tara said. And so I kind of want to go into what childhood trauma is, like what causes childhood trauma, what that might look like for someone, and kind of go from there. So either one of you can go. Paulo, if you want to, Apostle, if you want to go first.
We tag team.
Yeah,
Right.
you go first.
So a lot of times with I have to look back at my note, it's been a long day. So but when you're talking about childhood trauma, it comes in so many different forms. It is, but I often look at the basic needs model. And a lot of times if a child's basic needs are not being met, you're getting ready to send them into a path of trauma, childhood trauma, not meeting those basic needs, safety, health, different things like that. When we stop meeting those and we're focused, parents are moving in emotional or physical neglect, these can be some of the starters. Like we said before, poverty, not being able to meet those child needs because of it being, because the poverty situation that the parents may be in. But I will say one of the biggest things that I see in these last couple of I won't say couple of years, but this last decade or so, is the lack of interaction between parents and their children as it relates to, sometimes it's I hate to say it like this, but I watch parents sometimes and electronic devices, and your child is looking into your eyes to make a connection with you, and you are looking at your phone. You're watching something on TV. You're not interacting with your child, or still following some of, and I'm not talking about the guy from Star Trek, but Dr. Spock methods of their little tiny adults. They're not, you know what I mean? They kind of need that interaction from you. And then they need that part of when you're, you can't just leave them to cry and then figure out, oh, they're going to be fine. You're going to make them spoiled. Some of the things that we believe are really factors into increasing the amount of childhood trauma, because you didn't respond to meeting their need when they were crying. Basically, you taught that child that no matter how much I scream, no matter how much I raise this noise, nobody's going to come help me and nobody's going to come rescue me. So we have to be more cognizant because, like I said, there's so many varying factors, and I'm sure Dr. Terry will go into those. But we have to be more cognizant of how we're interacting with children, because we can be the precursor to them starting down all of these paths.
Right.
Well, there it is. I actually want to just kind of build a little bit off of that too, because a lot of things that you said resonated with me. And I think it even goes to the fact of our generational parenting styles. That's also a part of childhood trauma. And even with that, I heard recently, I think this was about maybe a few days ago, someone tried to correlate between post-traumatic slave syndrome and parenting. So coming from that standpoint of what was deemed as a form of survival as it relates to parenting practices has now really bled into the generational parenting strategies and styles that we have, especially as Black or African American individuals. And even with that, let's go to that social media part and that electronic device. I think a lot of people, even during COVID, they're misappropriating the fact that they're in the home and that they are present, but yet still they're emotionally absent. Like you said, Apostle Paul is like, you are that much more engaged to your device than you are with your child who is standing right there next to you. So sometimes that could even be even much more detrimental, So all of those different dynamics come into play. But to the original question, when you said, what is childhood trauma? I like to go back to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's a pioneer in this field of trauma work, not me. So I rather go to the the person who does this on a consistent basis. And he said something before. He said, the single most important public health challenge in the U.S. is us addressing childhood trauma. Whether it's sexual or physical abuse, anywhere from fondling to rape to severe spankings, take it up a notch to life-threatening beatings, especially within North America. So these are all elements of childhood trauma. And it's funny because a child that experiences childhood trauma, they're then taught that they need to preserve their sense of trust in people that are not trustworthy. They're even taught in these spaces that safety in a situation, that's just a matter of, just hopeful or wishful thinking in that way, that their power in a situation really comes in the form of helplessness. So you see all of the swap outs that happen with childhood trauma, and don't even talk about the neurobiological part, and the new pathways, brain waves that are created as a result of trauma. So, and then you say you got to have coping skills on top of that.
Right.
Which one do I pick?
Right.
But I think of the causes of childhood trauma, I don't know. I just go right back to a parent's instability, whether it's emotional, whether it's financial, circumstantial, all of that. It's such a big and broad topic. But based off of my research and just studying it out and having clients that have severe cases of childhood trauma, that's what surfaces more times than not.
And I would just like to add to that is that I really wish, and if I would say to the cultures that people of color, that we stop shaming the next generation of parents for wanting to parent differently than our great grandmama and them did. Like there should be a generation that doesn't have a memory of grabbing a switch off the tree, choosing your own form of punishment, or some of the things that are said and that are just words that are accepted in a style of speaking to a child and different things like that. But when oftentimes what happens is that if you say, well, I'm not going to raise my child like that. I don't want my child to just know spankings. I don't want my child to just know me yelling at them. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're trying to raise your child white. No, I'm just trying to raise my child healthy. But it's sad because the parents don't get a lot of support within their own support system, because the system is like, no, we've been toxic since great grandmama and them. And we're going to stay, we're going to born and bred toxic. And we kind of just kind of reinforce that. And it's like, wait, who stops this? Who really says, you know what, my family unit will not be like this. Mm-hmm. My family unit gets to stop this. My next generation, my children are going to know love. They're going to know respect. They're going to know they have their voice. Because if we stop doing this to children, we will have less adults trying to find their voice or insert their voices in places or put themselves in a situation, or just basically living in survival brain.
Right.
Instead of, we can actually get a generation to thrive instead of just survive. Mm-hmm. But we've got to stop as a core group shaming, even though we have the memes and everything, we laugh about certain things like, yeah, I remember that, you come home and the lights are off, you know what I'm saying? Like the lights aren't working. When you flip the switch, your mama got the extension cord and she about to tear everybody up in the house. Everybody, one person do thing, everybody gets in trouble. Those things are not always the best methods, because you teaching me that I have to take a punishment for something I didn't do and wasn't involved in, but because little Johnny decided to burn the kitchen curtains, I got to take a punishment.
Yeah, I got to, because then that's what the norm was, and we recreate these patterns over and over again. But the minute someone is challenging that narrative, or saying, well, there could be another option, there could be another way, it's like, no, how dare you think outside of the box? How dare you think that there's something else, But hey, sometimes you have to create those healthy patterns, even if you didn't grow up with that. And it's funny because I grew up in the Bahamas, and it's the same practices. This ain't just I thought it was just Bahamians and that kind of stuff, but no, this is literally worldwide experiences. And I said the same thing too. I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, but are you going to actually do the work to figure out what else you can do to versus just saying this is what you want to do? So there's that effort, that responsibility too, to change the narrative.
And being strong enough to do it without the support system. And that takes a level of strength, and really honing in on yourself and saying, I don't care what everybody else says. This is the path that I'm choosing for my family unit. Because sometimes you're not going to get that support, and you have to know how to navigate through that lack of support and the things that are going to be said at family gatherings. And you know what I mean? Just, oh, they sedity, that's the type of stuff. You think you uppity. Well, I just want them to know how to read a book. I don't know what to tell you.
How about that? Wow. Yeah. And I think it's also about boundaries too, like putting up those emotional boundaries as well. So if there are unhealthy patterns, like for me, I know there were unhealthy patterns as it relates to my upbringing, and I had to put up those emotional boundaries for a sake of preservation, but also to be able to say, well, this is a decision that I am making, and that's it. I don't need to give an explanation, but this is my choice, versus the influence of unhealthy practices in parenting and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned, you both kind of hit on, is the effects that it happens to the brain and then how trauma actually can be carried in someone's body and can actually change their DNA, and those long-term effects and what that actually looks like, whether it's in their relationships or whether there's a higher risk of addictions, whether it's alcoholism or higher rates or greater probabilities of them not having great educational outcomes. And so I kind of want to transition and talk about those long-term effects and what that looks like, whether it's individually in their lives or when it comes to their relationships with other people, and how can we identify those things. So either one, Apostle, you can go first, or Dr. Tara, either one. Dr. Tara, you can go first. Either one, it doesn't matter.
So the body and the mind stores trauma. That's just what the research say. That's just facts. I even heard of a book. It was called "The Body Keeps the Score," and that's so true. So your body will let you know when the effects of your traumatic responses or your trigger responses in that type of way. So I think it behooves us really to pay attention to the signs. So what is really triggering you? That's something that you need to pay attention to. Is it something that you might have just suppressed for so long and it's surfacing in your relationships? So you can have trigger responses within your relationships, and that can look like you cursing people out, you storming off in these intimate relationships, friendships, whatever the case might be, you yelling over people, possibility of physical altercations, being aggressive, even in the form of you giving silent treatments. Where did you learn that from? When did that start? I know for me, that was always a go-to as far as silent treatment, but that was birthed out of the unhealthy relationship with my dad as it relates to emotion, like that emotional connection. So earlier we talked about social media, and then the parent actually being physically present but emotionally absent. So right now I'm an adult child of an emotionally immature parent, and that came out in silent treatments, that came out in me shutting down. So that's how it has affected relationships. And it even came out in waves of I always had expiration dates on people, like, okay, so they're going to come in my life, going to be here for about 3 months, and then that's it. So that right there, I think getting to a point of realizing that, hey, well, that's not healthy. I don't know what the alternative is, but I'm willing to actually find out or to do that deep work through counseling, because I want that for myself. I don't want to repeat the generational patterns. So Nidra Tawaglova, she likes to call them adult tantrums. I don't know if that originated with her, but that's an example of how it can affect your relationships as well. Feelings of you're not good enough, that you must perform for love. That kind is so many things that are attached to the effects of childhood trauma, and even there's the likelihood of re-victimization as well. So it's so many different, things that can come out. And I think the starting point really is you being self-aware, you realizing those things that are, I wouldn't say necessarily like dysfunctional, but if you're not able to do your regular day to day effectively, and you have like these reactionary type of responses versus being able to take time to think and process and all this stuff that they teach you, then that might be a result of childhood trauma. Um, so yeah. There's more we can go into, but
Yeah, it is a pretty extensive background, but like she said, your body does keep the score. It is in. I think a lot of times what happens is you find yourself in a situation, and then you're trying to figure out why you're triggered, and so people working with individuals and really trying to help them find their triggers. Like, okay, why did you have such a strong reaction to this?
Mhm.
That in the grander scheme of things, was that a normal reaction? Was that, what parts, helping them identify what parts do you feel like is abnormal about that? Because then we have to go back and we can find sometimes between with the childhood trauma that this is what you've seen consistently. And so you start responding or you start reacting out of that place because that's what you saw your mama do. That's what you saw your grandmama do. That's what you saw all the women in your family do. And so I think when it comes to interpersonal relationships, a lot of times people tend to forget that the first language we learn to speak is the language of our family. So then in interpersonal relationships, we have to learn how to, especially let's say, for instance, between a husband and wife, you come in and out, you come into a marriage, you're speaking the language of your family. And so especially if you have not gone through a healing process, an emotional healing process, or any of those things, the first language you're going to speak is the language of your mama, daddy, now. What you have to create in your interpersonal relationships or in your marriage is a dialect. What do you speak? How do you speak and how do you interact with your spouse, and how are you going to format this? Your family may never change their language, but you don't have to still speak that language.
Right.
You can still be in a family line, and that's the language of your family. Screaming, hollering, and yelling can be the language of your family, but you can create a dialect in which you speak calmly. You speak from a rational place. You don't self-medicate, just because there's a trauma there. And I think those things too, as well, as we don't talk about as much the way people self-medicate. And unfortunately, I see this all the time with my people, church people. We self-medicate and we hide behind the Bible a lot of times when we self-medicate. But we don't want to be honest about how we're self-medicating. And it's starting to come out. These childhood traumas are starting to show up. Not feeling validated, not feeling value. And social media is taking our wounded voice and giving it a platform. And now we got 50 million followers who are just as wounded as we are. And they've got childhood trauma, and my childhood trauma looks like your childhood trauma. So let's all be traumatic together. And it's like, whew, we all need some sessions,
Wow. So true. And I even, thought about, as you were saying, it's like when you're in intimate relationships as well, and you are triggered, it's like asking that question, what did that person get too close to? What did they get too close to that warranted that type of response? Yeah, I might need to pay attention, a little bit more attention to that,
Yeah, all they did was ask you, did you want eggs? And now
I want to scramble. Did you need to do it that way?
Right. Why are you screaming about eggs? And it's like, because you have some memory that you haven't really paid attention to, that it can be totally surrounding. Maybe your mother was cooking eggs one day and went off on you really, really bad, or threw something at you, and you've kind of suppressed that in order to move on and still be able to sit at the table with mama without crying every 5 minutes. And so you push that to the side just so you can try to have some type of normal interaction with this family member. And now when somebody asks you about eggs, and you caught a smell of something that triggered that memory, or something happened, and you just, boom, now I'm screaming and trying to defend myself, and the person is still standing with the skillet like,
okay.
Would toast be better for you? Like, they don't know why you're screaming. We don't even eat eggs. You know what? Forget eggs. You know what? I don't even like eggs. We'll talk about eggs again.
Did I say eggs? Oh, no.
All right.
You guys are making really great points. I want to ask this question, though, because you both have mentioned triggers. How would you heal a trigger that maybe you've come into an awareness of, maybe this is stemmed from my childhood? How does a person take that step to heal those triggers? And do they go away?
Mm.
I know that's a that's an interesting and heavy question, but
Yeah, 'cause, woo.
I,
Go ahead, Dr. Tara.
I think just when you ask a question, I think you can decrease the level of intensity as it relates to certain triggers. It does depend. Um, but the starting point, I think, is that self-awareness that, hey, and that ownership is not saying that that's who you are long term, but hey, I can own the fact that I am being triggered by X, Y, and Z. So in order for me to heal that, I need to acknowledge that it exists and come out of that space of denial. And then I need to figure out, well, what is that next step? That next step might look like me going to counseling, because I might not be able to self discover the coping skills that are needed in order to help decrease the impact and the level of intensity as it relates to that trigger. And a lot of times people do suppress things. They didn't realize that, a certain situation happened at just the right time, and then a response that is so explosive comes up and they're like, what happened? So we need to go back in counseling to figure out what is the origin of that response. So I believe, and this is just personal, I believe that the intensity can decrease over time with intentionality. I'm not saying that it's something that can just, go extinct, or, just be like, okay, I don't, because suppose there's something else that aligns, and then, you know, so yeah, that's my initial thoughts as it relates to that question.
Um, I usually spend a lot of time with individuals learning how to help them find ways to change that behavior. We do a lot of reaction versus response. So we do, okay, this happened, you got triggered, you had a reaction. Okay, what's a better way to respond? Because I'm trying to shift them into a place where they understand how to shift their perspective on it. I think what happens with a lot of people is that, they get so far. Now, like she said, definitely you got to acknowledge it. That's like the first step is you have to acknowledge it. But
Mhm.
then it also takes the process of saying, okay, I acknowledged it. Now, how am I going to change this so I don't keep having the same results? And
Mhm.
so having people begin to take, because some people just like to, I identify my triggers. I know what my triggers are. Okay, that's great. But how are you going to change the behavior attached to the trigger? Because that's where we need to go. Because now we're kind of getting this. I don't know what's going on in this culture now. We get this. Yes, I know this is me. This is how I is. No, no, no.
Oh, I am. That's it.
How you is,
not healthy.
it's not healthy. Just because you acknowledged it doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means that you acknowledged it, and great. I'm glad you got it on the table, but can you throw it in the trash? Like you need to
Right.
clean that off your plate. Like that's not something you carry around like a badge of honor. Like, yes, I'm wounded. All right.
Yeah.
And so we kind of are doing way too much in embracing these toxic behaviors and then using them as badges of honor and saying, yes, this is, you need to accept my toxicity. So helping people learn how to take those triggers and then changing the behavior. Like, of course, identify where it's coming from,
Mhm.
and then let's work on changing your perspective. Work on your perspective of how you're going to change that, because that's critical. And
Mhm.
so that goes into the decreasing part, is because you can actually get to, I would say, I would use my personal experience, is once I started to say, okay, I got to change that behavior. Like, just telling somebody that they're stupid, like, that's not okay. Like, you can't really just, you know,
Uh-huh.
it's
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
because I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling and just being like, I'm keeping it real. You, you not keeping it right. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
so, and just being like, I'm just being me, but that wasn't me. I was having an identity crisis. And so to discover the real me, I had to deal with the triggers, acknowledge them, and then change the behaviors that was attached to them. It's pieces and parts. We don't get to stop along the way. Keep going until
Yeah.
you get the result that's going to bring you health and healing.
Yeah.
Because even with that too, the like you said, the behavior actually maintains the triggers or the trigger response. It maintains it, so it keeps it in motion. So you definitely have to identify those behaviors and work towards changing them, especially if they're super unhealthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome points. Yeah. I want to ask this question. So, for those that do or have childhood trauma and they've kind of taken a step to seek help or to seek treatment, and they've identified their triggers or they're coming and progressing into that self awareness. What if they are at a point where that childhood trauma is greatly affecting, how they deal with other people, and whether it's interacting with them, or if they're at a place and stage where they're dealing with, like, for example, arrested development. What can they do from there? Would it be or reflect the same thing as far as counseling and kind of taking those steps towards healing in that area? What if it's something that's harder to tackle? What should a person do in that circumstance?
Okay. So when you said that, that last part, when you said that it's something that's too hard to tackle, are you talking about the person that might have already tried counseling or might have already, identified their triggers and all of that stuff, and they're ready to progress? I just want to make sure I respond in the correct way.
Yeah, so if they have been through counseling, because a lot of
Okay.
people, maybe they've been to counseling and it didn't work. Maybe because the relationship didn't mesh well with the therapist.
Hmm.
What if they've tried it and they've progressed, they've identified triggers, or they've kind of taken certain steps as far as tracking, this is my trigger, or this is something that I'm dealing with and how I respond. I need to not react in this way. I need to not say this or say that, or this is where my childhood trauma has affected me emotionally and mentally, and this is why I seek validation. So if they're at a point where they've done those things but they're still dealing with dealing greatly with whether it's arrested development or whether it's continuously seeking that validation or approval or those things, what are some things that they can do to kind of move forward from there, especially if they've already kind of tried to seek therapy or treatment?
Mm. Pastor Paula, I'll let you, do what you do best.
So, that was a loaded question. I'm like, wait a minute. So for those individuals who have done it before, I think sometimes what happens in a counseling process is, we jump in with a counselor, but we do have to build a rapport with our therapist. And it's okay if the rapport is not there. You are free to find somebody else who can help you along the way, because you are going to be unpacking loads of things that you're going to need to unpack. And it's okay to have that time and to have that space with that individual. And you want to look for certain things. You want to look like, okay, do they have an ease about them that's going to allow you to talk with them freely? Are you going to be where you could talk about how you're going to deal with up front. You could talk about how you're going to deal with, hey, what happens when we come to challenges where you say something to me and it challenges my core belief. How are we going to process through those moments? I think sometimes, we just kind of say, well, I went to counseling, so, and think that it's going to be all good. But you sometimes have to vet your therapy process as well, so that you can find a healthy space. You're looking for a healthy space to unpack and build a trust with your therapist as well, that you can that this person is going to take this journey with you. And it might not be the first person you find. It may be the second or the third or whatever have you. And you have that right to find that person that is going to help you walk along that way. Lately I found myself telling people, you have the right to be healed. You know what I mean? And everything that goes with that, you have all rights and purposes and intentions that go with that. You have a right to be healed. And so whatever it's going to take for you to get that healing, that's what you're going to have to do. I would encourage people that when you start this process and you have identified those triggers, and if you're still having those reactions, then you may need to, with this time around, with whoever you're choosing to do your counseling with or your sessions with, really hone in on the fact that you need some behavioral adaptations. You need some strategies to change the behaviors, because that's the other piece with that too, is that when you go in, you can go in saying, this is what I feel like I need. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times we put so much pressure on the therapist, like you can just go in, you're going to sit in the chair, and they're going to be like, yes, I can figure it all out for you in 45 minutes. Like, no, I need you to talk back. I need you to be open. I need you to, kind of go through that process. But I think what happens is that, we can know all the things that we should be doing with healing, but we have to be willing to go to that next level. I would love to tell you that, when I started my healing process, that overnight, because this is another thing, and I'm going to talk to church people for a minute. Man, if you guys don't stop thinking that this is going to happen with 2 huck bucks and a couple of oil drops, I promise you, it's not in your shout. It's not in your huck-a-buck. It's not in your dance. Sometimes you need to stop dancing and sit down.
Wow.
And get healed. Because it's not. You just shout it out. No, I'm not about to shout it out. Because I shouted. And I've been screaming for the last 40-something years, and nobody has still heard me. So now I need to be ye all the way healed, which is my tagline, Brittany. But you need to sit down sometimes and just go through that process and stop glossing over it and thinking that that's going to do that. No, you got to do the behavioral process as well.
Yeah. And I think if people get in the mindset of seeing counseling as also preventative in nature, I think that would help as well, because it's like, hey, well, we go to the doctor, we do our preventative care kind of stuff, and then, but counseling can be treated in that type of way as well. And I think for that individual, if they're still experiencing some of the symptoms, what is your comfort level as it relates to psychopharmacology, where you use where you're taking medication to help, as it relates to the neural pathways and that kind of stuff, and depression, depression, that kind of stuff, that and therapy, or you might want to go the naturopathic route, where you see someone who specializes in that. So this might be a point where you seek out not just a general professional counselor, but you seek out someone who specializes in those key areas that you might still have difficulty with. So I agree too with Apostle Paula. It's like a lot of times it's not a one fix thing. So you might have to see 2 or 3 counselors before you're able to lock in with someone. I've experienced that. I went into a session. I was like, hey, I'm a counselor, so I could very well tell you what you need to hear. I need you to call me out of my stuff. That's it. So, but having that self-awareness to say, well, this is what I'm looking for. Help me explore this. So I think sometimes people see the I'm in counseling thing as a checklist item, when life is a journey. Yeah. There's going to be new things that are going to come up. How are you responding to those new things? When you can have a series of good things that are happening in your life and still need counseling because you don't know how to deal with stress. So you don't know, so it depends. I'm super, super glad that individual would know what their triggers are, and they're self-aware, and they know how to reach out, who to reach out to, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a journey. So yeah,
and I would just add to that: don't quit when it starts challenging you. Don't quit when it starts challenging you. The very first time, now, don't get me wrong. The very first time I went to counseling, I did it because they provided it free at the college I was at, and I was like, okay, so I'm gonna make an appointment because I feel overly stressed and I can't really process everything that's going on. And before I end up on the 6 o'clock news, let me find somebody that I could talk to.
Mhm.
And so I went to go talk to this lady, and she had more problems than me. And I was like, "Wait, what?" So I knew that wasn't gonna work. But I
Mhm.
remember it wasn't even that. I specifically didn't go back because she challenged a core belief, and she was like, "You're
Mhm.
doing way too much for other people, and what time are you taking for yourself?" And I thought,
Well,
she doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know my lifestyle, and I should have never came. And I'm just gonna, and Prophetess Brittany and I talked about this earlier, and so I said because there are people who are in church, and there's some people who are already not church, and so sometimes I have to talk to because that's my core. That's I talk to people who are in church. We have to stop over spiritualizing things.
mhm.
And so, because I was like, I'm a Christian and I'm supposed to be selfless and I'm supposed to give like this. And I was like codependent, but I didn't want to admit that I was codependent, and all my relationships were toxic because I was codependent. So I had to really come into the understanding of she challenged the core belief and I didn't go back. So sometimes we need to be very aware that when they
Mhm.
challenge our core belief, it hits that same pain receptor as if you're taking a punch.
Mhm.
So you respond physically to it when they challenge your core belief, but that doesn't mean you have to run away from it.
Right.
Right. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, certain things become self-fulfilling prophecies too. So when you said like don't quit and you're saying, well, oh well, they don't know what they're talking about and blah blah blah, and that's just how they are. That's just, every counseling experience. Well, if you do that long enough, then it's gonna turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy because you created the patterns that maintain
Yeah.
that. So you have to, when you're challenged, like you said, you have to lean into that because it's going to feel different. It's going to feel uncomfortable, all of that, but that's the expectation that change is going to be a bit uncomfortable
Mm,
because
Yeah.
it's something new that you're cultivating.
right.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
then I guess the question would be, what would therapy be without the challenge? Like the purpose of, them challenging, whether it's your thinking or whether it's your behavioral patterns or things like that. I think that that's like the key to being able to identify those areas in which a person is struggling. So, Dr. Tara, I know before you had previously talked about um, dealing with parenthood in the sense of their emotional maturity.
Hmm.
Can you kind of elaborate on that for those who may be listening,
Hmm.
who are affected by their parents' state and where they are, and then Apostle, you can kind of add on to that after her.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. This is an area that I kind of, like to zoom in on because a lot of people don't. I think it's more detrimental in some ways to have a parent that is physically present but emotionally unavailable for their child. Because it's like, yeah, I can have this relationship, but I'm being pushed off. I'm being, constantly rejected, or, there's this extreme level of distance that's between us, even though physically we're close. And it's that parent that's also, so self-involved that they don't even notice. So absolutely, childhood emotional neglect is something that happens more times than we anticipate or expect, but it is evident. And just a resource for those that are resource driven is this book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self Involved Parents. Those people that might not have the funds for counseling, because I know that everyone doesn't do pro bono work, that kind of stuff. This is a really good book, a really good source for those that are dealing with parents, or have dealt with parents in their childhood that have been emotionally distant, rejecting, or neglectful in that type of way. So, um, yeah, I feel like when parents are emotionally immature, their children's emotional needs will almost, always lose out to the parent's own survival instincts. So you're asking something of a parent that's in some ways not capable of giving that to you. um, you might be requesting well, hey, I need you to show love in this type of way. If you're like a teenager or something, you're saying, well, I receive love best in this type of way. But if your parent isn't emotionally available, neither capable of that for you, what do you do? So I think even Apostle Paul, you talked a little bit earlier, like, just existing in in families where the family dynamic and the family language or the family dance doesn't change. But what do you do in that space? So that's when you seek out and yes, you go to counseling and all of that. But if your starting point is, well, I just need to know what it is that's really, going on within me, then that's a good starting point. Educate yourself. That sounds easier said than done. But just being candid, if I didn't have the background or the experience that I had, I still feel as though the resources that I was able to acquire along the way would have been that much helpful for me. So yeah, I would love to, just talk a bit more about child and emotional neglect because almost every person that I talk to um, in the past year about childhood trauma hinted at elements of that, you know. But who's going to report it? Who's going to report that?
Yeah.
Who's going to, facilitate that discussion? But yeah, I hope I answered your question in some type of
Oh yeah.
roundabout way.
Oh yeah. Yes, you did. You
Sometimes I
did.
talk in circles, but hey,
No, you
yeah.
did. You did. Apostle, did you want to add to that?
Um, I would just add that, like she said, a lot of this childhood emotional neglect is coming up in a lot of adults. And it's like lately, the same as she said, you were saying a lot of people who, when we start dealing with things, it is coming from, that either super aggressive parent or the parent that wasn't there. And so what I find is these adults, like she said, we're trying to get something from somebody and get something from their parent and it wasn't available. And so then we have to then shift the session to this part where I start addressing, you've been trying to get you've been trying to make an emotional withdrawal from somebody who's emotionally bankrupt. And you're always going to come up with an overdraft because it's always going to be in the negative. You're trying and trying and trying. And so let's look at ways that you can stop pulling up to the ATM with the expectation that you're going to get something out of this emotional ATM. You're not. So let's come to, we kind of have to go through the process and then we, go through them letting go of that expectation. And then we start looking at healthy ways that they may not be able to get that from their parent, but they can create a space in which they can find it within themselves. Two, they can find it from the people that they're around. That sometimes requires them changing some of the people that they're around or changing, their support network or whatever they have to do. But we find ways that they can fill that gap without it being a toxic or anything like that. But we kind of come away from the thing of you got this expectation that mom's going to sit down and have these deep conversations with you. She's not. She doesn't even have the language to do that with you.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that was even in her lineage to do. There's no way that you're going to get that from her. And so letting go of that false expectation that this is all of a sudden magically going to happen. Maybe one day it will, but even if it doesn't, we need to make sure you're good.
Right. Can I add a quick example to that too? Yeah, like you can't allow them to hold you hostage, emotionally hostage at that point. So what that might look like is, let's say you have, lived away from your family for a considerable amount of time. And you're asking your parent, mother or father, you're asking them to visit you. They don't want to visit, that kind of stuff. When you ask again, knowing good and well that they're probably not going to visit, and you get that no response, and it triggers something within you. You start crying, all of that stuff. That's when that person has too much control over you. in that way. So what that might look like is you saying, well, hey, I had this type of response to that. That probably was over the top. I'm grown. I shouldn't be having this amount of response from something that has been happening for my entire life. That looks like you then putting up that emotional boundary to say, well, hey, maybe I'm not going to be in communication with this, although it's going to hurt. Maybe I'm not going to be in as frequent communication with my parent or with whoever it is because I need to do this for me. This is me securing my heart. This is me guarding my heart because every time the expectation is there and I'm let down. So, how many times do we put out and we put out and the expectation is unmet? So I think it's coming to the realization that, hey, this has happened more than two, because once it happened more than twice is a pattern. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it can be challenging to deal with those when we start realizing that some of our expectations are a little unrealistic for what that person is packing.
Yes.
And so I don't, sometimes it almost feels a little bit like a grieving process because you're letting go of the ideology that this is going to happen. And when you have to come into the realization that they just don't have it to give. But if you go through that process, you actually hit a healing point because you realize that there's a different perspective on it that you have to take. When you have to look at it and you have to look at the bigger picture. Because sometimes when we're doing these interactions with individuals, we're just looking at the frame of them and me, them and me, them and me. And so because we're so caught in that tunnel vision, we forget. Let's look at what they grew up with. Let's look at, was this ever historically a part of what we do and how we interact with people? No, then you're asking them to change a narrative to a story that they didn't even get a chance to write a chapter in.
Woo.
Yeah.
So you're asking them to change a narrative. They've never been able to write their own chapter, and they don't have the wherewithal to do it. They don't even have those skills to write that chapter. So once you start to realize, okay, this is not going to work. I had to learn that, there was a lot of people who were living at one point in time before the healing process. There was a lot of people who were living based upon how they had interacted with me as a child, and my head rent free. And I was like, this is not healthy. Like, if I'm talking to my spouse crazy because my mama talked crazy, and I saw her talk crazy to my brothers, and then I decide I'm gonna talk crazy to him because this is how women in my family talk. Wait a minute now, hold up. So I had to realize my mama gone. She has way too much control over my language, over my emotions, over my mental well-being, over my interactions with people. I started serving people 30-day eviction notices in my head. You gotta go.
Okay.
Deuces, you have violated the contract of why you were here. You were here because you were my parent. You were here because you were my sibling. You were here because you were my boyfriend. You were here because you were my husband. But you have now violated the contract and the rules and the regulations of you being able to still occupy this space. Bye-bye. Pack your suitcase because you got to go. Here's your 30-day eviction. Hope you find some new place to live because it won't be in my head.
Right. And it's hard. It's challenging. It really is. But like you said, if this person doesn't have the skills, neither are they willing, then what? What at that point? Yeah, they gotta go. They gotta pack up their bags, like you said. Come on.
Right. You keep pulling up to the ATM like, maybe this time. This is
a little bit.
it's the magnetic strip. No, it's not. This is the ATM. You put something in, you expect to get something out. This is not the casino. You gotta stop treating your relationships like this is Harris Casino. And maybe in this time I'll put the quarter in. It's gonna work. No, it's not. It's not.
That's
So
a
how do
wishful thinking. Yeah.
how do people create boundaries based on that? Like, what does that look like?
Ooh. Well, given the example that I gave earlier, you just got to start. I mean, I think here's the thing. you got to get in this mental space where you're like, okay, I need to say this. This is a necessary boundary. This isn't optional anymore. I'm not negotiating this boundary at this point. So, what does that mean? That means I need to get in a space of confidence. I might need to rehearse what that boundary sounds like. I might need to write it out, text it out, adjust it, take some of the emotion out of it before sending it. I might need to do those steps, but it's not negotiable. I need to do this because what depends on this? My sanity depends on this. My emotional stability depends on this. So that's you showing up for yourself intentionally at that point. So whatever, given that example, what that might look like is, if you know that the individual is a texter better than a caller, you have some uninterrupted time if it's a call, and you can do it in a space where you have another obligation lined up and you only have a certain amount of time to do it. So that way you're not drowning it out, but you're setting that boundary, but you're not just setting it, you're keeping it. So if that person comes back and they try to test that boundary, which will happen, you're already in the mindset of this is a boundary that I'm going to keep. It's already set. And if I don't keep it, then I'm saying that my word means nothing. So I'm training them. I'm training them that my word means nothing. Don't believe what I say. So it's that follow through that's really, really, really imperative.
Yeah, because you definitely have habitual boundary breakers.
Okay.
Absolutely.
They will run over you like cattle. So if you don't, if you don't really say, okay, that's enough. And so even when I have individuals who have very toxic parents, they've come out of codependent relationships with their parents because it's all toxic and there's no boundaries and it's just all over the place. One of the things that we work on is before you pick up that phone, check your emotional intelligence. Are you even in a good headspace to make this phone call? Because it's okay to swipe and just nope, not right at the moment because I'm processing something else or I'm doing something that you have a right to protect your emotional health. And if you're just not, it doesn't mean you're not going to call them back. It just means that you have the right to remain silent, because specifically for certain types of parents that may be very, very toxic, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They will bring it back. And if you weren't in a good headspace when you started that conversation, they're going to take something that you said, they're going to ride it, they're going to knock into it, they're just going to drive it. And before you know it, the whole conversation has went to the left and you're like, all I said was,
okay.
was okay. Why you say it like that? Now it's something you're talking. It just cycles. It just spins out of cycle, and it's not necessary to do that. So you do have a right to set those boundaries. You have a right to be whole. You have a right to be healed. You don't have to put yourself in those situations. So boundaries, I always tell people, you can start smart. I mean, smart. It would be smart for you to start small. Sometimes we think with boundaries, I just got to cut everybody off. No, you don't. No, you don't, because you're not teaching yourself a healthy technique for how to vet relationships. Mm-hmm. You're just cutting people off, and you're still going to remain wounded. So the next cycle of people that you allow in that space, you haven't fixed that space. You haven't healed that space for them to walk into. So guess what? Toxic group number 2 shows up and you're doing the same cycles. You don't have to. You can put strategies and boundaries in places, and people who are going to come into your space are either going to fit within that parameter, or they're going to find there's no room for them and they're going to exit themselves. I don't really have to cut people off. People just exit. Mm-hmm. Because I keep my space safe. I protect my space. Okay. And if you can't navigate within this space, and I'm navigating with yours, and we're respecting each other's space, then there's no place. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So start small.
Yeah. As you were talking, this just came to me, like as far as boundaries. I wrote down remember your boundaries, reinforce them, and repeat them. That's it. Remember, reinforce, repeat them. Like you gotta build that pattern with your boundaries, necessary ones, right?
And if you have a counselor, role play with your counselor.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to, I've had to have plenty of conversations, and I was like, okay, level 1, level 2, or level 3, because at this point, what matches your voice? Because I've had some people be like, "Ooh, I don't know if I don't know if I got it within me to say that at that at that level." And I said, "Okay, we can come down." You know what I mean? If you're not comfortable doing that at that level, that's not your healed voice just quite yet. We can take it down. Which one do you feel most comfortable saying? Okay, and then how do you, especially if you have certain people, and let's just say, for instance, they have a mental health, a personality disorder, I then have to role play the counter. What you when you said this, now you understand they're gonna say this. 9 times out of 10, okay, how are we now? And we navigate through a conversation, and with the understanding that they're not going to repeat me verbatim, but it starts teaching them tools and techniques to get through those things. And then you have to do this most of the time around holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Childhood emotional trauma creeps up so much when we have to do those family gatherings. I think with us being in a pandemic, a lot of people was able to be like, oh, my Wi-Fi went out, click, you know what I mean? So they were able to escape during the pandemic. You could blame it on the Zoom, but, but when the world opens back up, you better have the techniques in place to deal with the toxicity so you don't end up throwing a turkey at your granddad's head. It's not necessary.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the things that people fear, like when it comes to those interactions, you've already experienced that already. You've already experienced some of that residue already. You experienced rejection already. And it's kind of letting them know that, hey, you've probably felt the worst of this, especially at such a vulnerable age. So we're reminding you at this point that you are strong enough to do this, to carry this out, to follow up and follow through with these boundaries or tools and techniques that are given. Yeah.
That kind of went into my next question. This is the very last question because we have kind of reached our time limit. But the question is, you can list 1 to 3. If someone were to ask you, what are some coping mechanisms that I can kind of take as a person that is going through this or experiencing trauma or childhood trauma, and I'm an adult, or really no matter the age, what are some coping mechanisms that they can take with them?
I would say the giving yourself room to breathe. Breathing is really a huge thing, because sometimes people get so caught up in the overwhelming part of the emotions, and sometimes just stopping and just breathing, we kind of discount, because it's like, oh, it's just breathing, I mean, that's nothing, but sometimes you do need to take that moment, because you need to get those emotions to kind of calm down. Some people may need to journal. Some people just them writing out, different thought processes and different things like that. But also finding a safe space to talk, especially with individuals when it comes to childhood emotional neglect or childhood emotional trauma. Most of the time, those individuals somewhere is what I call, you lost your voice. You lost your yes, you lost your no, you lost your right to decide, to make a healthy decision, because you were just being told what to do, and they're coming at you, or your voice wasn't heard when you would try to speak to your parent or try to get your needs met. Having them find someone to talk to, and even if it's not a counselor per se, maybe you can't go to, find somebody who you can trust, and like somebody just put in the comment, find a safe space to talk. Find somebody that you can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say uh, for my Christian people, sometimes you need a physical person to talk to. I'm not telling you not to pray, but sometimes you need that other person that you can physically touch and see, and you need to talk to them as well. It's okay to find somebody that is a physical person to talk to. Yes, talk to Jesus. Yes, talk to God. Yes, talk to Holy Spirit, but talk to somebody in the physical, in the natural as well. It doesn't disqualify you as a Christian. It doesn't make you weak. You're just reaching out to get the help that you need.
Yeah. And I think I'll just add to, because I agree with all the above. All the above. So yeah, it might be that accountability person, like that call on me type of person. So just as you have, mentors for different spaces in life, I know like for me, I have a spiritual mentor. So if I have this code word text kind of thing, then she know that it's serious or something. So and we have that agreement already that, hey, if I need you in this type of way, I'm gonna try my cope, like what works. But in the event that what I'm doing isn't working anymore, and I need to reach out to you, then this is what I'm gonna say. And she would absolutely excuse herself, and that's reciprocal in that type of way. So it would take you getting to a point where you're able to trust people again, because I know sometimes even with childhood trauma, that trust factor is almost non-existent. It's always, skepticism or something that's in the mix as well. So definitely an accountability person. I'll also agree with journaling. And even in the journaling, um, when you're faced with a situation or a trigger, what is fact and what is truth? So taking the time to really sift through what is fact and what is truth. Yes, the fact is that I went through X, Y, and Z. But what is the truth about me? What is the truth about my situation? What is that perspective looks like? And then even with the deep breathing, that might come in the form of apps if you're an app type person.
Mhm.
You might need to, like, if you have like a high anxious response to something, you might want to listen to some raindrop music. I know that calms me down and gets me in a space where it's a bit more of a normalcy. Or you might just need to listen to instrumentals or have those on your phone, or um, again, if you're more of an app type of person. So you have to try different things to see what works, especially if you're a person that doesn't have any coping skills or mechanisms. You got to try things for not just one time, but you have to try it consistently for a period of time so that you can see what works for me. And then, yeah, I also, recommended books, that kind of stuff. So if you're more of a reader, or if you're, more of an auditory type of learner or listener, then, get an audiobook. Educate yourself about what it is that you're experiencing, because once you're educated, that also helps informs how you perceive situations, and it can also impact the behavior that comes from situations that might trigger or remind you of past experiences. So yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
So
Well,
yeah.
thank you all so much. I really appreciate you both being willing and able to join us tonight to talk about childhood trauma into adulthood. As we are coming to an end, I would love for you both to share actually where people can find you if they have questions or if they need some guidance about what they're currently experiencing. If you can share whether it's your Facebook page or your business Facebook page or wherever, and what resources they can kind of get from you. So let's start with Dr. Tara, and then we'll go to Apostle.
Okay. So I am on Instagram at Dr. Tira Henderson. That's DrTerah Henderson, Henderson. And I'm also on Facebook as Tira L. Henderson, LinkedIn as Tira L. Henderson. And my email contact is tira.l.henderson@gmail. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
You can find me on the Facebook page of Aruka Ministries, and the website is www.arukaministries.com. You can reach me by email at paulacole@arukaministries.com. Those are the different places that you can that you can connect with me. I do have my personal page, but people, you can either message me on the business page, or you can message me on a personal page. And so, if you need to set up sessions, so be it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again. Next month, we are going to continue on a topic. I will announce that at a later time. But once again, I thank you all, and thank you to the viewers that were able to kind of join and were able to actually engage in the conversation. I really appreciate it. And you can actually find these videos on YouTube and our Facebook page at Love and Lights Initiative Center. And once again, I hope you guys all have a great evening, and I will see you guys next month. So thank you. Bye.